I'm David Martinez, 41, a successful software architect who built everything from nothing. For 15 years, I thought my wife Emma and I were partners, until the night she looked me straight in the eye and said, "It's not my job to make you happy, David. Figure it out yourself." Those words shattered something inside me, but what I discovered in the weeks that followed changed everything. See, while I was working 70-hour weeks to build our dream life, Emma had been building something else entirely, a secret plan that would have left me with nothing. But she made one critical mistake. She underestimated the quiet accountant she married. What happened next wasn't just about money. It was about justice, truth, and the cost of taking someone's love for granted. If you've ever felt invisible in your own marriage, you'll want to hear this story. To understand how devastating Emma's words were, you need to know what I thought we had built together. Our life looked perfect from the outside, a testament to the American dream that my immigrant parents had sacrificed everything to give me. The 4-bedroom colonial in Westchester, the German cars in the driveway, the family portrait hanging in our entryway, where Emma's smile seemed so genuine, it fooled even me. I had worked my way up from nothing. My parents came here from Mexico with empty pockets and endless hope. They cleaned offices at night so I could focus on school during the day. Every late night I spent coding. Every weekend I sacrificed for our software consulting firm. I told myself it was worth it because Emma and I were building something together. TechFlow Solutions wasn't just a business. It was our future. I'd started it in our garage 3 years into our marriage, and Emma had been there from the beginning, handling the administrative work while I developed the algorithms that would eventually make us wealthy. At least that's what I believed. Our success had been meteoric. We went from a 2-person operation to a company worth 8 figures in just over a decade. I specialized in financial software for mid-market companies, creating systems that helped businesses optimize their operations and maximize profits. The irony wasn't lost on me later. I was an expert at protecting other people's assets while my own wife was systematically undermining mine. Emma had always been ambitious, which I admired. She came from old money in Connecticut, the kind of family where success was expected rather than celebrated. Her father was a retired investment banker. Her mother chaired 3 different charity boards. When we met at a tech conference in Boston, I was immediately drawn to her confidence and sophistication. She seemed to believe in my potential before I even believed in it myself. In those early years, she'd stay up with me reviewing contracts, celebrating every new client, dreaming about the life we'd build. She talked about wanting children, about traveling the world, about the foundation we'd start once we made it big. I worked those 70-hour weeks because I thought I was working toward our shared vision. But somewhere along the way, Emma had started pulling away. It happened so gradually I barely noticed at first. She stopped asking about my projects. She started making plans without consulting me. When I suggested date nights or weekend getaways, she'd find excuses, work commitments, social obligations, anything but time alone with me. I told myself it was natural. Successful couples evolved, grew more independent. We were both driven people with demanding careers. Emma had transitioned from administrative work to business development, and she was good at it. She had a natural charm that opened doors and sealed deals. I convinced myself her growing distance was just professional confidence. The separate bank accounts should have been a red flag, but Emma presented it as financial sophistication. "Successful couples maintain some independence," she'd said. "It's healthier." I agreed because I trusted her completely. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife, my partner, the person I'd built everything with. Even her late-night phone calls seemed innocent at first. Business development required networking, she explained. Clients in different time zones, potential partnerships that needed nurturing. I was usually in my home office anyway, deep in code, grateful that she was handling the parts of the business I found draining. What I didn't realize was that Emma wasn't just growing distant, she was systematically preparing for a life without me. While I was building our future, she was building her exit strategy. The family portrait in our entryway, the one where her smile looked so genuine. That photo was taken just 6 months before she started meeting with divorce attorneys. Even then, she was already planning her escape. The anniversary dinner was supposed to be a fresh start. I'd been feeling the distance between us for months, and I thought one perfect evening might remind us of what we'd built together. I made reservations at Chez Laurent, the French restaurant where we'd had our first date 15 years earlier. The same corner table, the same wine we'd shared when we were young and broke and dreaming of everything we'd eventually achieve. I left work early that Tuesday, something I rarely did anymore. I bought Emma white roses, her favorite, and spent an hour getting ready. I even wore the navy suit she'd bought me for our 10th anniversary. The one she said made my eyes look darker and more serious. Looking back, I realize how desperately I was trying to recapture something that was already gone. Emma seemed surprised when I told her about the reservation. Not pleased, surprised. Like I'd interrupted plans she'd already made. But she agreed to go, and I took that as encouragement. Maybe she was feeling the distance, too. Maybe she wanted to bridge it as much as I did. The restaurant hadn't changed much in 15 years. The same warm lighting, the same classical music playing softly in the background. Our waiter, Felipe, actually remembered us from our early days when we'd split a single appetizer and shared the cheapest bottle of wine on the menu. Now we could afford anything we wanted, but somehow the abundance felt hollow. I ordered champagne, Dom Perignon, because I wanted everything to be perfect. Emma barely touched hers. She kept checking her phone, apologizing each time but doing it anyway. When I asked about her day, she gave me the same generic responses she might have given a client or coworker. Nothing personal, nothing that revealed the woman I'd married. Remember our first date here? I asked, gesturing around the restaurant. You ordered the duck, and I was so nervous I could barely eat. Emma looked up from her phone with what I can only describe as mild annoyance. That was a long time ago, David. Not that long, I said, trying to keep my voice light. 15 years. We were just kids then, weren't we? So excited about everything we were going to do together. She set down her fork and really looked at me for the first time all evening. There was something in her expression I'd never seen before. Not just distance, but something colder, something that made my stomach clench with sudden dread. David, she said, her voice taking on that patient tone she used with difficult clients. We're not kids anymore. We're different people now. We want different things. What do you mean? I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. Emma folded her napkin carefully, precisely, the way she did everything. I mean, I can't be responsible for making you happy anymore. It's exhausting, trying to live up to some fantasy version of marriage you have in your head. The words hit me like ice water. Fantasy version? Emma, we're celebrating our anniversary. You wanted what? She interrupted. To pretend we're still the same people who sat here 15 years ago. To play house and ignore the fact that we've grown apart. I stared at her, this woman I'd loved since I was 26, and felt like I was looking at a stranger. I thought we were partners. I thought we were building something together. Emma's laugh was soft but cruel. You've been building something, David. I've just been along for the ride. The champagne turned bitter in my mouth. What's that supposed to mean? She leaned forward, and for a moment I thought she might take it back, might soften her words. Instead, she said the thing that would replay in my mind every night for weeks. It's not my job to make you happy, David. Figure it out yourself. The silence that followed was deafening. Around us, other couples were having normal conversations, laughing, enjoying their meals. Philippe approached to refill our water glasses, took one look at our faces, and retreated without a word. Emma, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. What are you saying? But she was already reaching for her purse, already standing up. I'm saying I'm done pretending. We'll talk about this at home. She left me sitting there with the anniversary dinner receipt that would become evidence of the last time I tried to save our marriage. $247 for a meal that tasted like ash and dreams that crumbled faster than I could understand what was happening. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Emma slept peacefully beside me. The ease with which she'd fallen asleep after destroying our anniversary dinner was almost more devastating than her words. She breathed slowly, evenly, like someone with no regrets, no guilt, no second thoughts about what she'd just done to us. I reached for the bottle of sleeping pills on my nightstand, something I'd started taking months earlier when work stress began affecting my rest. The irony wasn't lost on me that I needed medication to escape from the life I'd worked so hard to build. I dry swallowed 2 pills and waited for unconsciousness to take me away from the echo of Emma's voice. It's not my job to make you happy, David. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, my mind raced through 15 years of marriage, searching for clues I'd missed, signs I'd ignored, moments when I should have seen this coming. How long had Emma felt this way? How long had she seen me as a burden rather than a partner? I thought about our wedding day, how radiant she'd looked walking down the aisle of her family's country club. Her father had spent a fortune on that wedding, the kind of elegant affair that announced to their social circle that Emma was marrying well, even if she was marrying beneath her class. I'd been so grateful then, so proud that this sophisticated woman had chosen me. Had it all been an act, even then? I remembered our early years, when we'd lived in a cramped apartment, and Emma would curl up next to me on our second-hand couch while I worked on client projects late into the night. She'd bring me coffee and ask about the code I was writing, genuinely interested in understanding what I did. Or at least, she'd seemed genuinely interested. Maybe I'd been projecting my own feelings onto her all along. Maybe her interest had been strategic rather than romantic, even from the beginning. Her family had money, but they also had expectations. Marrying a promising entrepreneur was smart positioning for someone with her background. The sleeping pills were starting to work, making my thoughts fuzzy around the edges, but my mind kept circling back to recent months. How many times had I suggested we spend time together only to be met with excuses? How many evenings had I eaten dinner alone while Emma attended networking events or client dinners that always seemed to run late? She'd been pulling away so gradually that I'd convinced myself it was normal. Successful couples evolved, I'd told myself. They developed independent interests and goals. But now I wondered if what I'd interpreted as growth had actually been preparation. Emma slowly disentangling herself from our shared life. The worst part was how stupid I felt. I was supposed to be smart, analytical, good at recognizing patterns and solving problems. That's what made me successful in business. But I'd been completely blind to what was happening in my own marriage. Emma stirred beside me, and for a moment I thought she might wake up, might reach for me the way she used to in our early years. Instead, she pulled the covers closer around herself, unconsciously creating more distance between us even in sleep. I thought about tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days stretching ahead of us. How do you go back to normal conversation after your wife tells you it's not her job to make you happy? How do you share breakfast and discuss weekend plans and maintain the everyday rituals of marriage when the foundation has just cracked open? The pills were finally taking effect, dragging me toward unconsciousness, but my last coherent thought was a resolution. I needed to start paying attention. Really paying attention. If Emma had been pulling away for months or even years, there had to be other signs I'd missed. Phone calls that ended when I entered the room. Emails she closed when I walked by her computer. Changes in her routine that I'd accepted without question. Tomorrow, I decided, as sleep finally claimed me, I would start watching my wife the way I watched market trends and business metrics. Carefully, analytically, looking for patterns and inconsistencies. Because something told me that Emma's cruel words at dinner weren't the end of this story. They were just the beginning. 3 days after the anniversary dinner, opportunity presented itself in the most mundane way possible. Emma had rushed out for her morning yoga class, leaving her laptop open on the kitchen counter where she'd been checking emails over coffee. She never left it open. Emma was meticulous about security, always closing and locking her devices, but that morning, she'd been running late, distracted by a phone call that had come in just as she was leaving. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the glowing screen, my coffee growing cold in my hands. This felt like crossing a line I'd never crossed before. In 15 years of marriage, I'd never snooped through Emma's personal things. I'd trusted her completely, respected her privacy, believed that healthy couples gave each other space. But Emma's words kept echoing in my head. It's not my job to make you happy. David, the coldness in her voice, the finality of it. This wasn't a woman going through a rough patch in her marriage. This was a woman who had already checked out. I set down my coffee and moved closer to the laptop. The browser was open to her Gmail account. I could see the preview pane showing recent emails, nothing immediately suspicious. But then I noticed the search history drop down, partially visible at the top of the screen. My hands trembled as I clicked on it. The search terms that appeared made my blood run cold. Divorce Settlement Calculator, New York. Hidden Assets Divorce Proceedings. How to Maximize Alimony Payments. Business Valuation in Divorce. The timestamps showed these searches had been going on for 3 months. 3 months of careful research while she'd been sharing my bed and pretending everything was normal. I screenshot everything with my phone, my heart pounding so hard I was sure the neighbors could hear it, but I couldn't stop. I opened a new tab and checked her browsing history directly. More searches. Community property laws, spousal support duration, how to prove financial dependence in marriage. There were visits to legal websites, forums for divorcing women, articles about protecting yourself financially during marriage dissolution. She'd even bookmarked a page titled, Signs Your Husband is Hiding Money, and another called, How to Document Financial Abuse. Financial abuse. She was planning to claim I was financially abusive. Me, the man who had given her access to every account, every business decision, every financial detail of our lives. I navigated to her email drafts folder, something I never would have done if I weren't already in free fall. There, saved but never sent, was a draft email to someone named Margaret Schlesinger. I Googled the name quickly. Margaret Schlesinger was one of Manhattan's most aggressive divorce attorneys. known for securing massive settlements for wealthy women. The draft email made my legs weak. Ms. Schlesinger, I'm reaching out regarding a consultation for what will likely be a complex divorce proceeding. My husband and I own a successful software company together. Though I believe I've been systematically excluded from major financial decisions, I'm concerned about hidden assets and need guidance on protecting my interests. The marriage has become emotionally unsustainable, and I need to understand my options. Please let me know your availability for a confidential consultation. I took screenshots of everything, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. Emma had been planning this for months. While I'd been working myself to exhaustion trying to build our future, she'd been systematically preparing to take half of everything and disappear. But it got worse. I found a hidden folder in her bookmarks labeled New Life that contained real estate listings in downtown Manhattan. Luxury apartments, far beyond what she could afford on her business development salary alone. She was already planning where she'd live after she took me to the cleaners. There were also saved articles about starting over after divorce, rebuilding your social life, even pieces about dating again in your 40s. She wasn't just planning to leave me. She was planning her entire post-David existence. The sound of her car in the driveway sent me into a panic. I closed all the tabs, made sure the laptop looked exactly as she'd left it, and grabbed my coffee with hands that were still shaking. By the time Emma walked through the door, I was standing by the window, ostensibly checking the weather on my phone, but actually making sure all the evidence was safely stored in my photo gallery. "How was yoga?" I asked, proud of how normal my voice sounded. "Fine," she said without looking at me, already reaching for her laptop. Same routine as always, but it wasn't the same routine. Nothing was the same anymore. Emma had been living a double life for months, and I'd been too trusting, too focused on work, too comfortable in my assumptions to notice. As I watched her check her email, probably deleting search history, and being more careful about her digital footprint, one thought crystallized in my mind. If Emma could plan this methodically, so could I. If she wanted to play strategic games with our marriage, she was about to learn that she wasn't the only one who could think 3 moves ahead. The following Tuesday, Emma announced she was going to her evening yoga class as usual. She'd been religious about these Tuesday and Thursday sessions for the past 4 months, always returning home relaxed and glowing, talking about how much the practice was helping her find inner peace. I'd been proud of her for prioritizing self-care, encouraging her to take that time for herself. Now I knew better. I waited 20 minutes after she left, then drove to the yoga studio she claimed to attend. Mindful Movement on Elm Street was a small, intimate space that Emma had discovered through a coworker. I'd even suggested joining her a few times, but she'd insisted it was her personal sanctuary, her time to disconnect from everything else. Her BMW wasn't in the parking lot. I sat in my car for an hour, watching every person who entered and left the studio. Emma never appeared. When the evening classes ended and the lights went off, I finally understood that there had never been any yoga. For 4 months, Emma had been lying to me twice a week about where she was spending her evenings. The next Thursday, I was ready. I followed her at a distance, my heart pounding with the guilt of spying on my own wife. She drove straight through town, past the yoga studio, and into the financial district. She parked in front of a gleaming office building and walked into the lobby like she belonged there. I waited in the parking garage across the street, using binoculars I'd bought that morning. Through the large windows on the 7th floor, I could see into what looked like a law office, and there was Emma sitting across from a woman in an expensive suit. Papers spread between them on a conference table. I called the building directory and learned that Margaret Schlesinger's law firm occupied the entire 7th floor. For 2 hours, I watched my wife plan my destruction. I saw her animated hand gestures, her occasional laughter at something the attorney said, the way she leaned forward when discussing what I assumed were financial details. She looked more engaged than she'd been with me in years. When they finally stood up, I got a clear view of the attorney, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the predatory confidence of someone who made a living destroying marriages. As they shook hands, Margaret Schlesinger handed Emma a business card and what looked like a folder full of documents. I drove home quickly, making sure I was there before Emma returned. When she walked through the door an hour later, she was carrying her yoga mat and wearing workout clothes, her hair slightly messed to suggest she'd been exercising. "How was class?" I asked, testing her. "Wonderful," she said without missing a beat. "We worked on balance poses tonight. Very centering." She even did a few stretches in the living room, selling the performance completely. The next Tuesday, I followed her again. This time, she met Margaret Schlesinger at an upscale coffee shop downtown. I sat at a corner table hidden behind a newspaper and listened to fragments of their conversation. The business valuation will be key, Margaret was saying. We need to establish that you are an equal partner in building the company's success. David handled the technical side, Emma replied. But I was instrumental in client relations and business development. The company wouldn't exist without my contributions. That was a lie. Emma had helped with administrative work in the early days, but she'd never been involved in any major business decisions. She'd transitioned to business development only after we were already successful, taking a role that was more social than strategic. What about hidden assets? Margaret asked. He's too honest for that, Emma said with what sounded like disdain. David's weakness is that he trusts everyone, including me. He has no idea I'm even considering this. They discussed strategy for nearly an hour. Margaret explained how to document emotional neglect, how to present Emma as the victim of an emotionally unavailable workaholic husband. They talked about timing, when to file, how to serve papers, how to maximize Emma's settlement by catching me off guard. The key, Margaret explained, is to establish that you've been financially dependent despite your contributions to the business. We need to show that David controlled the money and made you feel helpless. Emma nodded eagerly. He does handle all the finances. I could argue that he deliberately kept me in the dark about our assets. Another lie. I'd offered to include Emma in every financial decision, had shown her our accounts and investments multiple times. She'd always claimed she wasn't interested in the details, that she trusted me to handle the business side of our lives. When Emma paid for their coffee with cash, no credit card trail, I understood I was watching a masterclass in strategic deception. Everything was calculated, from the yoga cover story to the off-the-books meetings to the careful construction of a narrative that would paint me as a controlling husband and her as a victim. I found the coffee shop receipt in her purse later that evening when she was in the shower. $24 for 2 lattes and a pastry, evidence of a meeting that wasn't supposed to exist, with a lawyer who was helping her plan the systematic destruction of everything I'd worked for. As I photographed the receipt with my phone, I realized that Emma had underestimated me in one crucial way. She assumed I would remain oblivious until it was too late. She thought she was the only one capable of strategic thinking. She was about to learn otherwise. That weekend, while Emma attended a supposed spa day with her college friends, I began my own investigation. If she could spend months planning my financial destruction, I could spend a few days understanding exactly what she'd been doing with our money. I spread 15 years of financial documents across my home office floor like an archaeologist examining artifacts, bank statements, credit card bills, investment records, business accounts, everything we'd accumulated together during our marriage. What I found made my stomach turn. The pattern started about 8 months ago. Small transfers at first, 500 here, 1,000 there, from our joint checking account to an account I'd never seen before. The transfers were always on days when I was traveling for business or working late on major client projects. Emma had been methodical, careful never to take enough at once to trigger any automatic alerts, but it added up. Over 8 months, she'd moved almost $40,000 into this mystery account. Money that should have been earning interest in our joint savings. Money that we'd budgeted for home improvements and our eventual retirement. Money that was simply gone. I called the bank, claiming I needed information about all accounts associated with our Social Security numbers. The customer service representative was helpful. Too helpful. There was indeed an account I didn't know about, opened 7 months ago under Emma's maiden name. The balance was significant enough that the representative couldn't discuss details over the phone without additional verification. But I didn't need details. I had the banking statements that showed money flowing out of our joint accounts, and the timing that coincided perfectly with Emma's secret legal consultations. She'd been building a war chest while I was building our future. The credit card statements told another story. Emma had opened 3 new cards in her maiden name, cards I'd never seen or known about. The charges were small and strategic. Coffee shops, office supply stores, a legal document service. She'd been funding her divorce preparation on credit cards that wouldn't show up in our regular financial reviews. Then I found the business accounting. Irregularities. As the technical founder of TechFlow Solutions, I'd always handled the software development and client implementation while Emma managed administrative tasks and client relations. But looking at our business bank statements with new eyes, I noticed discrepancies I'd previously overlooked. Emma had been signing checks to vendors I didn't recognize. Legal consulting services, business valuation firms, financial planning consultants, all legitimate-sounding names that could easily be explained as normal business expenses if I'd asked. But I trusted her completely. never questioning her business expenditures as long as our revenue stayed strong. One check made my blood run cold. $15,000 to Strategic Asset Management, LLC. I researched the company online and found it was a firm that specialized in hiding assets during divorce proceedings. Emma had been using our business accounts to pay for services designed to help her steal from me. The most damning evidence was in our investment portfolio. Emma had been our primary contact with our financial advisor, handling the administrative side of our retirement planning and investment strategy. She'd convinced me months ago to restructure our investments for better tax efficiency. I'd signed the paperwork without reading it carefully, trusting her judgment and our advisor's expertise. Now I understood what had really happened. The restructuring had moved significant assets into accounts that would be harder to trace and value during divorce proceedings. Emma had been positioning our money to maximize her settlement while minimizing my ability to protect what I'd earned. The bank statement that served as the smoking gun was from an account I'd never seen before, an account in Emma's maiden name with a balance of over $60,000. Money that had been systematically moved from our joint assets over the past 8 months. Money that represented years of my 70-hour work weeks, client development, and business growth. I photographed every document, every suspicious transaction, every piece of evidence that showed Emma's careful preparation for a divorce that was supposed to catch me completely off guard. She'd been treating our marriage like a business acquisition, positioning herself to extract maximum value when she dissolved the partnership. The cruelest part was how she'd used my trust against me. Every time I'd asked about a financial decision, she'd framed it as being helpful, taking administrative burdens off my plate so I could focus on growing the business. I'd been grateful for her involvement, proud of how well we worked together as a team. But we'd never been a team. I'd been a resource to be managed and eventually harvested. As I organized all the evidence into a secure folder, I realized that Emma had made one critical miscalculation. She'd assumed I would remain focused on work, distracted by client demands and business growth, too trusting to notice what she was doing with our money. She was right that I'd been trusting, but she was wrong about my attention to detail. I'd spent my career analyzing complex financial systems, identifying inefficiencies and building better processes. Now I was applying those same analytical skills to my own life, and Emma's carefully constructed plans were unraveling under scrutiny. The question now wasn't whether Emma had been systematically stealing from me. The evidence was overwhelming. The question was what I was going to do about it, and whether I could protect what was left before. She decided to pull the trigger on her carefully planned exit strategy. The most devastating discovery came when I pulled out our original business formation documents. I hadn't looked at them in years. They were filed away in our safe, relics from a time when Emma and I were young and idealistic and building something together. Or so I'd thought. The business partnership agreement told a story I'd forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood. When we'd incorporated TechFlow Solutions 12 years ago, I'd contributed $87,000 in startup capital, my entire savings from my previous job, plus a loan against my 401k. Emma had contributed $5,000 and a promise to handle administrative work while I developed our core software products. Yet somehow, the ownership structure showed a 50-50 split. I remembered Emma arguing for equal partnership back then. "We're a team," she'd said. "Marriage is a partnership, and so should our business be." I'd been so in love, so eager to build a life with her, that I'd agreed without hesitation. It seemed romantic at the time. Two people committing to success together, sharing everything equally. Reading the documents now, I realized how naive I'd been. Emma had contributed less than 6% of our startup capital, but had secured 50% ownership. She'd positioned herself to claim half of everything we built, regardless of who actually built it. The corporate resolutions told an even more disturbing story. Over the years, Emma had gradually increased her official role in the company, despite never being involved in the technical work that generated our revenue. What had started as administrative support had evolved into vice president of business development and eventually co-CEO. Each promotion had been formalized with corporate paperwork that I'd signed without thinking, trusting Emma to handle the bureaucratic details while I focused on client work. But Emma had never brought in a single major client. I'd developed every piece of software, solved every technical challenge, and personally managed the relationships that generated our 8-figure annual revenue. Emma's business development consisted mainly of attending networking events and managing our social media presence. Yet according to our corporate structure, she was legally entitled to claim equal credit for building the company. I found meeting minutes from board meetings I barely remembered attending, formal sessions where Emma had insisted we needed better documentation for regulatory compliance. She'd drafted resolutions describing her contributions to company growth, her leadership in strategic planning, her essential role in our success. I'd signed them all, assuming they were just paperwork to keep our corporate attorney happy. Now I understood. They were building a legal foundation for Emma to claim she'd been an equal partner in creating our wealth. The most damning document was a consulting agreement Emma had executed 6 months ago. Without my knowledge, she'd hired a business valuation firm to assess TechFlow solutions. The report valued our company at $12.3 million, with detailed analysis of revenue streams, intellectual property, and market position. Emma had been planning to claim half of $12.3 million. But the valuation contained a critical flaw that revealed Emma's fundamental misunderstanding of what we'd built. The report attributed significant value to our proprietary algorithms and software solutions, but it failed to recognize that all the intellectual property was tied to my personal expertise and client relationships. Emma might own 50% of the company on paper, but she owned 0% of the knowledge and relationships that made the company valuable. I cross-referenced the valuation with our actual client contracts and discovered something even more troubling. Emma had been providing confidential business information to the valuation firm: revenue figures, profit margins, client lists, and strategic plans. Information that could damage our competitive position if it fell into the wrong hands. She'd been so focused on maximizing her potential divorce settlement that she'd risked compromising the business that generated our wealth. The final piece of evidence was a memo Emma had written to our corporate attorney 6 months ago, requesting guidance on protecting minority shareholder rights and ensuring equal distribution of business assets. She'd been laying groundwork to challenge my operational control of the company while simultaneously planning to take half the value. As I photographed every document, every signature, every piece of paper that showed how Emma had systematically positioned herself to claim credit for my life's work, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Not just betrayal, but strategic clarity. Emma had spent years building a legal case for why she deserved half of everything I'd created. She'd documented her alleged contributions, formalized her role in company governance, and positioned herself as an equal partner in our success. But she'd overlooked one crucial detail: intellectual property and client relationships couldn't be divided like bank accounts. Emma might be entitled to half our corporate assets, but she had no claim to the expertise, reputation, and professional relationships that actually generated our revenue. If Emma wanted to play legal games with our business partnership, she was about to learn that I understood corporate structure better than she'd assumed. I'd built this company from nothing once before. If necessary, I could do it again, without her. Once I understood the scope of Emma's betrayal, I needed to know how far it extended. Had she recruited allies? Were our mutual friends already choosing sides based on lies she'd been telling about our marriage? I had to map the battlefield before I could plan my defense. I started with Emma's family, people I'd considered my own family for 15 years. Her parents had always been polite but distant. I was never quite good enough for their daughter, despite our financial success. But Emma's younger sister Rachel had always been different. She'd been our maid of honor, had stayed with us during her divorce 3 years earlier, and had always seemed genuinely fond of me. I called Rachel on a Saturday morning when I knew Emma was at her book club meeting, another event I now questioned the authenticity of. "David." Rachel sounded surprised but pleased to hear from me. "How are you? Emma mentioned you've been working a lot lately." "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about," I said carefully. "Has Emma said anything else about me recently? About our marriage?" There was a long pause. "David, I probably shouldn't." "Please, Rachel. I need to know what she's been telling people." Rachel sighed. "She's been saying you've grown apart, that you're never home, that you've become obsessed with work to the point where you ignore her completely. She says you've made her feel invisible in her own marriage." The words stung because they contained just enough truth to be believable. I had been working long hours. I had been focused on growing the business. But Emma had encouraged that focus, had claimed she understood and supported my dedication to our financial future. "Did she mention anything about divorce?" I asked. "Not directly," Rachel said slowly. "But she asked me about my attorney, wanted to know how the settlement process worked. She said it was just hypothetical, that she was worried about a friend who was having marital problems." Emma had been using her sister's divorce experience to research strategy for her own. Even her questions to family members had been calculated. "Rachel," I said, I think there are things about Emma that might surprise you. Things about our marriage that aren't what they seem. What do you mean? I couldn't tell her everything, not yet, but I needed to plant seeds of doubt about Emma's narrative. Has Emma ever mentioned that she's been meeting with attorneys? Or that she's been moving money into separate accounts? The silence on the other end told me everything. Rachel knew something. David, she said finally, Emma made me promise not to tell you this, but I think you have a right to know. She showed me a text message last month. It was from you, and it was really cruel. Something about how she contributed nothing to your success and was just dead weight in your life. My blood went cold. Rachel, I never sent Emma any text like that, ever. But I saw it on her phone. Text messages can be faked, I said. Screenshots can be manipulated. Did you see her actually receive the message, or did she just show you something that was already on her screen? Another long pause. She just showed me the screenshot. Oh God, David, you don't think she would... I think Emma has been preparing for divorce for months and building a case to make me look like the villain. I think she's been lying to everyone, including you. Rachel's voice was small when she spoke again. She's been asking for money. Small amounts, but still. She said you'd been controlling the finances and she needed some independence. I gave her $2,000 last month. Emma had been borrowing money from her own sister to fund her divorce preparation, using fabricated evidence of my alleged cruelty to justify the loans. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. Rachel, I need you to do something for me. Save any text messages Emma sends you, especially anything about me or our marriage. And if she asked for more money, please say no. Whatever she's told you about our finances isn't true. After I hung up with Rachel, I called 3 couples we regularly socialized with. The conversations were painful but revealing. Emma had been systematically poisoning our social circle, sharing carefully edited stories about my alleged neglect and emotional unavailability. She'd told our friends that I'd become a workaholic who ignored her needs, that I'd grown cold and distant, that I'd started making her feel worthless. She'd painted herself as the suffering wife of a man too obsessed with success to care about his marriage. But not everyone was buying it completely. Our friend Mark, a fellow entrepreneur, seemed skeptical. Look, David, he said, Emma's been saying you've changed, but honestly, you seem the same to me. And the stuff she's describing, ignoring her, being dismissive, it doesn't match the guy I've known for 10 years. What exactly has she been telling people? That you've become obsessed with money and status. That you criticize her constantly and make her feel stupid. That you've threatened to cut her off financially if she doesn't do what you want. More lies, more fictional narratives designed to build sympathy for Emma while making me look like an abusive husband. She'd been crafting a story that would justify whatever legal action she was planning. The most revealing conversation was with our friend Lisa, who worked in family law. Emma had apparently been asking her subtle questions about divorce proceedings, asset protection, and spousal support calculations, all disguised as concern for a friend who was having problems. She was very interested in how business valuations work in divorce cases, Lisa told me, and she asked about proving emotional abuse when there's no physical evidence. I thought it was odd at the time, but now that you mention it, now that I mention what? She specifically asked about documentation. How to prove a pattern of psychological manipulation when it's just one person's word against another's. Emma had been building a legal strategy based on false accusations of emotional abuse. She was planning to claim that I'd been psychologically manipulating her throughout our marriage, using financial control and work obsession to make her feel worthless. The text message screenshot she'd shown Rachel was just the beginning. Emma had been creating evidence, documenting alleged incidents, building a case that would paint me as an emotionally abusive husband who deserved to lose everything. As I hung up from that final conversation, I looked at the text message I'd received that morning from an unknown number. Your wife isn't the woman you think she is. Some of us have been watching. Call me if you want to know the truth. The number belonged to Emma's former business partner from 5 years ago, a woman named Janet who'd dissolved their marketing consultancy under mysterious circumstances. Apparently, Emma's talent for manipulation and strategic betrayal extended beyond our marriage. I was about to learn just how deep her capacity for deception really ran. Janet's story changed everything. Over coffee at a quiet diner 30 miles from our neighborhood, Emma's former business partner revealed a pattern of behavior that made my stomach turn. Emma destroyed our partnership systematically, Janet explained, sliding a folder of documents across the table, just like she's probably destroying your marriage. She's done this before, David. You're not her first victim. The legal consultation notes Janet showed me outlined a familiar strategy. 5 years ago, Emma had convinced Janet to start a marketing consultancy together. Janet had provided the startup capital and industry expertise while Emma handled client relations and administrative work. Sound familiar? Within 18 months, Emma had been secretly meeting with clients, negotiating separate contracts that excluded Janet, and positioning herself to steal their biggest accounts. When Janet discovered the betrayal, Emma had already consulted attorneys about dissolving the partnership in a way that would maximize her payout while minimizing Janet's. She claimed I was mentally unstable, Janet said bitterly. Made up stories about my drinking, my unreliability, my inability to handle client relationships. She documented everything: fake incident reports, manufactured email trails, carefully staged confrontations that made me look unprofessional. The parallels to my situation were terrifying. Emma had been building a case against me using the same playbook she'd used to destroy her previous business partner. How did you stop her? I asked. I didn't, Janet admitted. She was too far ahead of me. By the time I realized what was happening, she'd already poisoned our clients against me and positioned herself as the reliable partner who could save their accounts. I lost everything, but Janet had learned from her defeat. She'd kept detailed records of Emma's manipulation tactics, documentation that revealed a sophisticated understanding of legal and psychological warfare. Emma studies people, Janet explained. She identifies their weaknesses, their blind spots, their pressure points. Then she builds long-term strategies to exploit those vulnerabilities. She's not impulsive, she's methodical. This explained so much about Emma's behavior over the past months: the gradual emotional withdrawal, the financial maneuvering, the strategic lies to family and friends. It was all part of a calculated campaign to position herself for maximum advantage while making me look like the villain. The good news, Janet continued, is that Emma's overconfident. She assumes her targets will remain passive, that they'll react emotionally instead of strategically. She's not prepared for someone who fights back intelligently. Armed with Janet's insights, I spent the next week consulting with my own attorney. Not just any lawyer. I found Richard Chen, a family law specialist who'd handled complex business divorces for tech entrepreneurs. He understood both the legal and financial intricacies of what Emma was attempting. Your wife has been very thorough, Richard said after reviewing the evidence I'd gathered. But she's made several critical mistakes that work in your favor. The biggest mistake was Emma's assumption that I would remain oblivious until she was ready to strike. Her months of preparation had left a digital trail that would be difficult to explain in court. The fake text messages, the secret bank accounts, the business valuation, the hidden legal consultations, all of it could be presented as evidence of premeditated fraud. We need to document everything going forward, Richard advised. Every conversation, every financial transaction, every interaction. Emma will likely escalate her tactics once she realizes you're aware of her plans. Richard recommended installing security cameras in our home, discreetly positioned to capture any staged confrontations Emma might attempt. He also suggested recording devices for my personal protection, in case Emma tried to manipulate conversations to support her abuse allegations. The legal consultation notes Richard prepared became my strategic Bible. He outlined how to protect my intellectual property, how to trace the money Emma had hidden, how to present evidence of her fraud without appearing vindictive. Most importantly, he explained how to document Emma's behavior in ways that would undermine her credibility in court. Your wife is building a narrative, Richard explained. She wants to present herself as the victim of an emotionally abusive, financially controlling husband. Our job is to present the truth, that she's been systematically defrauding you while manufacturing evidence to support false allegations. Richard also connected me with a forensic accountant who specialized in divorce cases. Within 3 days, we'd traced every hidden transaction, every secret account, every piece of financial manipulation Emma had attempted. The evidence was overwhelming and would be devastating in any legal proceeding, but the most important advice Richard gave me was about timing. Emma is planning to catch you off guard, he said. She wants to serve you with divorce papers when you're unprepared, when you'll react emotionally and make mistakes. We need to be ready to counterattack immediately. As I left Richard's office that Friday afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: confidence. Emma might have spent 8 months planning my destruction, but she'd underestimated my ability to learn her game and play it better than she could. The confrontation was coming. Emma's timeline suggested she was almost ready to file for divorce, probably within the next 2 weeks. But instead of being caught off guard, I would be ready with evidence of her fraud, documentation of her lies, and legal strategies she hadn't anticipated. Emma thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to discover that I'd been studying the board much more carefully than she'd realized. The question wasn't whether I could protect myself from her planned attack. It was whether she could protect herself from mine. The voice recording device arrived in an unmarked package on Monday morning. It was smaller than I'd expected, barely larger than a USB drive, and virtually undetectable when clipped inside my shirt pocket. Richard had recommended it specifically for situations where someone might try to manipulate conversations or make false accusations. I hated that my marriage had come to this. Recording my own wife felt like the final death of whatever trust had once existed between us. But Emma had been lying to me for months, stealing from me systematically, and building a legal case based on manufactured evidence. I couldn't afford to be naive anymore. The first conversation I recorded changed everything. Emma had been increasingly agitated over the past week, clearly sensing that something had shifted in our dynamic. I'd been more observant, less trusting, asking questions about her schedule and activities that I'd previously accepted without question. She knew I was paying attention in ways I hadn't before. On Wednesday evening, she tried to provoke a confrontation. "David, we need to talk about your behavior lately," she said, setting down her wine glass with calculated precision. "You've been interrogating me about every little thing I do. It's making me feel like a prisoner in my own home." I kept my voice calm and steady, aware that the device in my pocket was capturing every word. "I'm just trying to understand what's happening with us, Emma. Ever since our anniversary dinner, you've seemed distant." "Distant?" Her voice rose with practiced indignation. "You're the one who's been distant for years. You work constantly, you ignore my needs, you make me feel invisible. And now, you're trying to make me feel guilty for wanting some independence." "What kind of independence do you mean? The kind where I don't have to justify every decision to you? Where I can have my own interests, my own friends, my own life without being questioned like I'm some kind of suspect?" She was trying to bait me into an angry response, something she could later claim was evidence of my controlling behavior. Instead, I remained calm. "Emma, I've never tried to control your friendships or interests. I've always supported your independence. But when you're secretive about where you go and what you do, it makes me feel excluded from your life." "Secretive?" The word came out like a slap. "How dare you call me secretive? Just because I don't report every detail of my day to you doesn't mean I'm hiding something." But she was hiding something. She was hiding everything. I found the bank statements, Emma. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched her face cycle through shock, fear, and then cold calculation as she realized how much I knew. "What bank statements?" she finally asked, but her voice had lost its indignant edge. "The account you opened in your maiden name. The one you've been transferring money to for 8 months. $40,000, Emma. $40,000 that you stole from our joint accounts." "I didn't steal anything," she said, but her denial sounded hollow even to her. "That money is as much mine as yours. I have every right to manage our finances however I see fit. By hiding accounts from me? By moving money without my knowledge? By lying about where it went?" Emma stood up and I could see her shifting into attack mode. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, David. You think you own me. You think every dollar we earn belongs to you, and I should be grateful for whatever allowance you give me. That's not true, and you know it. I've never controlled our finances. You've had access to everything always. Access isn't the same as control." She shot back. "You make all the decisions. You decide how much we spend, what we invest in, where we keep our money. I'm just the wife who's supposed to smile and agree with whatever you decide." The lies were breathtaking. Emma had been involved in every major financial decision we'd made. She'd often been the one pushing for bigger investments, more expensive purchases, riskier business moves. But now she was rewriting history to support her victim narrative. "Emma, you know that's not how our marriage works. We've always made financial decisions together." "No, David. You've made decisions, and I've gone along with them because I didn't want to fight. But I'm done being the submissive wife who pretends to be happy with whatever scraps of autonomy you throw my way." She was performing now, speaking loudly enough that the recording would capture every word of her false accusations. This was exactly what Janet had warned me about, Emma manufacturing evidence of my alleged controlling behavior. "I think you should sleep in the guest room tonight," she continued. "I need space to think about whether this marriage is something I can continue to tolerate." The word tolerate hit like a physical blow. 15 years of marriage, and she was describing it as something she tolerated. "Emma, if you're unhappy, we should talk about it. Maybe we should consider counseling." "Counseling?" She laughed bitterly. "So you can sit there and convince some therapist that I'm the problem. So you can have a professional validate your belief that I should be grateful for the life you've built for us?" "I've never said you should be grateful. You don't have to say it, David. It's in everything you do. The way you manage our money, the way you make decisions about our future, the way you act like I contribute nothing to our success. You've made me feel worthless for years. More lies, more manufactured grievances designed to build her legal case. But I had it all on tape now. Her admissions about the hidden money, her false accusations, her deliberate attempts to provoke conflict. As Emma stormed upstairs, leaving me alone in our living room, I realized that this conversation had been a gift. She'd revealed her strategy completely, claimed financial abuse, emotional neglect, and controlling behavior while positioning herself as the long-suffering victim who'd finally found the courage to fight back. The voice recording device had captured 43 minutes of Emma, destroying her own credibility. Her contradictions, her lies, her obvious attempts at manipulation were all preserved in digital clarity. But more importantly, it had captured something else, my own restraint and reasonableness in the face of her provocations. Any court that heard this recording would understand exactly who was the real victim in our marriage. Emma thought she was building evidence against me. Instead, she'd just handed me the proof I needed to expose everything she'd been planning. Emma's behavior became increasingly erratic after our recorded confrontation. She knew I'd discovered her financial deception, but she didn't know how much else I'd uncovered. The uncertainty was making her careless, desperate, and ultimately more revealing than she'd ever intended to be. I found her handwritten note purely by accident. Thursday morning. I was looking for a pen in the kitchen drawer when I noticed a folded piece of paper tucked behind the takeout menus. Emma's handwriting covered both sides in angry, slashing strokes, a list that made my blood run cold. David's failures as a husband was written across the top in capital letters, underlined 3 times. What followed was a catalog of grievances that read like a prosecution's closing argument. Never remembers important dates unless I remind him multiple times. More interested in his computer than his wife. Treats our home like a hotel. Expects everything to be perfect but contributes nothing to maintaining it. Dismissive of my career and accomplishments. Makes me feel stupid when I don't understand technical concepts. Controls all financial decisions while pretending to include me. Uses work as an excuse to avoid emotional intimacy. Has become increasingly cold and distant over the past 2 years. Shows no interest in my thoughts, feelings, or dreams. Acts like I should be grateful for the lifestyle he provides instead of recognizing me as an equal partner. Each accusation was numbered and dated, with specific examples that I realized were either completely fabricated or twisted versions of normal marital interactions. The entry dated 3 weeks ago claimed I'd rolled my eyes and made a dismissive comment when she'd suggested we visit her parents. I remembered that conversation clearly. I had agreed immediately and had actually suggested we stay an extra day. But the most chilling part was the bottom of the second page, where Emma had written, "Pattern of emotional neglect and financial control. Systematic undermining of self-worth. Marriage has become psychologically damaging. Document everything for MSMS Margaret Schlesinger," her divorce attorney. Emma had been building a case against me for months, manufacturing incidents and reframing normal marital dynamics as evidence of abuse. Every conversation, every interaction, every moment of our life together had been analyzed through the lens of how it could be used against me in court. I photographed every word before carefully replacing the note exactly where I'd found it. This wasn't just evidence of Emma's deception. It was a roadmap of her entire legal strategy. That evening, Emma tried a different approach. She came downstairs wearing the blue dress I'd bought her for her birthday, her hair styled the way I'd always loved it. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. "David," she said softly, "I think I overreacted last night. I've been under a lot of stress lately, and I took it out on you unfairly." The sudden shift from hostility to sweetness was jarring. I kept my voice neutral, aware that she might be recording this conversation just as I'd recorded our previous one. "What kind of stress?" "Work has been demanding. The Hendricks account has been particularly challenging, and I've been bringing that frustration home with me." Emma sat beside me on the couch, closer than she'd sat in months. "I know you've been working hard too. Maybe we've both been neglecting our relationship. The Hendricks account was a lie. I managed all our client relationships personally, and there was no Hendricks account." Emma was improvising, trying to create a plausible explanation for her recent behavior while testing whether I'd challenge her story. "Maybe we should plan a vacation," she continued, placing her hand on my arm. "Get away from work. Spend some time reconnecting. Remember why we fell in love in the first place. It was a performance, carefully calculated to make me doubt what I'd discovered about her plans. If I hadn't seen the evidence of her systematic betrayal, hadn't recorded her lies, hadn't learned about her previous pattern of manipulation, I might have been tempted to believe this softer version of Emma was real. Where would you want to go? I asked. Somewhere tropical. Maybe the Maldives? We could afford it now with how well the business is doing. She smiled, and for a moment the expression seemed genuine. We could renew our vows, make a fresh start. The suggestion was particularly cruel, given that she was planning to file for divorce within days. Emma was either testing my gullibility or buying herself time to complete her preparations. Either way, she was still lying to me. That sounds nice, I said carefully. When were you thinking? Soon, maybe next month. I could handle the arrangements if you want. Take some of that administrative burden off your plate. Even her fake reconciliation came with an offer to control our plans. Emma couldn't help herself. Every interaction was an opportunity to position herself for maximum advantage. Let me think about it, I said. Of course. Emma leaned over and kissed my cheek, the first affectionate gesture she'd made in weeks. I love you, David. I know we've had some rough patches lately, but I want us to work through this together. The lies came so easily to her that I wondered if she even remembered what was true anymore. Had she convinced herself that her grievances were legitimate? Did she actually believe her own propaganda about my alleged failures as a husband? After Emma went to bed, I sat in my office reviewing everything I'd learned about her deception. The handwritten note was the most damning evidence yet. Proof that she'd been systematically documenting manufactured grievances to support false allegations of emotional abuse. But it also revealed something else. Emma's desperation. The note was sloppy, emotional, filled with obvious exaggerations and contradictions. It wasn't the work of someone confident in her position. It was the work of someone who knew her case was weak and was struggling to find evidence to support it. Emma's attempt at reconciliation that evening had the same desperate quality. She was either having second thoughts about her divorce plan, or she was buying time to complete her preparations. Either way, her mask was slipping. The calculated manipulator was becoming erratic, making mistakes, revealing more than she intended. The question was whether she would complete her plan before her desperation led to bigger errors. Based on the timeline I'd observed, Emma was probably ready to file for divorce within the next week. But her increasingly unstable behavior suggested she might move faster than originally planned. I needed to be ready for anything. Emma was no longer the methodical strategist who'd spent months planning my destruction. She was becoming something more dangerous. A cornered opponent who might do anything to escape the trap she'd built for herself. By Friday morning, I knew Emma was planning to serve me with divorce papers within days. Her behavior had all the hallmarks of someone making final preparations. She'd been scanning and photographing documents, making mysterious phone calls from her car, and paying unusual attention to our home's contents, as if cataloging what she planned to claim. Richard Chen had prepared me for this moment. We'd spent hours developing a comprehensive strategy to protect my assets and counter Emma's expected accusations. The key was moving faster than she anticipated while documenting everything she tried to do to me. The asset transfer documents Richard prepared were my first line of defense. Since I'd created all the intellectual property that made TechFlow Solutions valuable, we could legally separate those assets from the corporate structure Emma thought she could claim. The software algorithms, client relationships, and proprietary systems were tied to my personal expertise and could be restructured as licensing agreements to a new entity I controlled entirely. Emma might own 50% of TechFlow Solutions on paper, but she would soon discover that the company was worthless without the intellectual property she had no legal claim to. On Friday afternoon, while Emma was at another fake yoga session, probably meeting with Margaret Schlesinger to finalize her attack strategy, I executed the first phase of my plan. I transferred all critical business data to secure servers Emma couldn't access, changed passwords on every system she'd previously had administrative rights to, and implemented new access controls that removed her ability to make unauthorized changes to our client accounts. The forensic accountant had helped me trace every dollar Emma had stolen over the past 8 months. The hidden bank account, the secret credit cards, the business expenses that had actually funded her divorce preparation. We had documentation of everything. More importantly, we'd identified assets Emma didn't know existed, investments and holdings that she couldn't claim because she'd never been aware of them. Richard had also helped me establish new banking relationships for my personal finances. The money Emma hadn't stolen was moved to protected accounts at institutions where she had no access or authority. By Sunday evening, Emma's ability to continue stealing from me would be completely eliminated. But the most important documents were the ones that restructured my relationship with TechFlow Solutions. Instead of being a 50-50 partnership where Emma could claim half of everything, The new structure made her a minority shareholder in a company that licensed its valuable assets from entities she had no stake in. On Saturday morning, I received a text from Emma saying she would be spending the weekend at her sister's house to think about our relationship. I knew this was a lie. Rachel had already told me Emma wasn't coming to visit. Emma was probably holed up somewhere with her attorney, finalizing the divorce papers and planning the timing of her attack. Her absence gave me the perfect opportunity to complete my preparations. I installed the security cameras Richard had recommended, small devices that would capture any staged confrontations Emma might attempt when she returned. I also made copies of every document in our house that Emma might try to destroy or manipulate. Business records, financial statements, personal correspondence, anything that might be relevant to divorce proceedings. The most crucial step was protecting our client relationships. I sent carefully worded emails to every major client, explaining that there would be changes to our corporate structure, but that service would continue uninterrupted under my direct supervision. I didn't mention divorce explicitly, but I made it clear that any business decisions going forward should be discussed with me, personally rather than with anyone else claiming to represent the company. Emma had assumed she could claim credit for our client relationships, but she'd never actually managed any accounts personally. When clients received my emails, several responded with confusion. They hadn't realized Emma was involved in company operations at all. Her claimed contributions to business development existed mainly in the corporate documents she'd convinced me to sign, not in any actual client relationships. Sunday evening, I received the call I'd been expecting. "David, it's Rachel. Emma's here and she's acting strange. She keeps asking about legal procedures and what happens to shared property in divorce cases. She's also been crying and saying things about you that don't sound like the David I know." "What kind of things?" "That you've been emotionally abusive for years. That you control all the money and make her feel worthless. That you've threatened to leave her with nothing if she ever tries to assert herself." Rachel paused. "David, Emma showed me bank statements that she says prove you've been hiding money from her. More manufactured evidence." Emma was still building her case, even while staying at her sister's house. "Rachel, did the bank statements show Emma's name on the accounts?" "No, they were all in your name only." "Emma said that proved you were controlling the finances without including her. Those are business accounts that I opened for client projects. Emma has her own access to all our personal accounts. She's been manipulating financial information to support a story that isn't true." The silence on the other end told me Rachel was beginning to understand the scope of Emma's deception. "David," Rachel said finally, "I think Emma is planning to file for divorce tomorrow. She asked me to be a character witness about your alleged controlling behavior. She wants me to sign a statement saying I've observed you being dismissive and manipulative toward her. Will you sign it?" "Not after this conversation. David, I think my sister has been lying to all of us." That evening, I received confirmation that Emma was moving faster than expected. A process server tried to deliver papers to our house, but I wasn't home. I'd been at Richard's office, finalizing our counterattack strategy. The server left a card saying they'd return Monday morning. Emma was planning a Monday morning ambush, probably hoping to catch me off guard before I left for work. She wanted to serve divorce papers when I was unprepared, emotional, and likely to make mistakes in my response. Instead, she was about to discover that I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. The asset transfer documents were ready, the evidence of her fraud was compiled, and the protection strategies were already in place. Emma thought she was playing the final move in a game she'd been winning for months. She didn't realize that I'd been playing an entirely different game, one where her systematic betrayal would be met with systematic justice. Monday morning was going to be very different from what she expected. Monday morning arrived with the precision of a military operation. I was in my home office by 6 a.m., reviewing the divorce papers Richard had prepared for me, papers that would counter every accusation Emma planned to make while presenting evidence of her systematic fraud and manipulation. Emma returned home at 7:30, letting herself in quietly as if she hoped to catch me still sleeping. I heard her moving around downstairs, probably positioning herself for maximum dramatic effect when the process server arrived. She had no idea I was already awake, already prepared, already 3 moves ahead of her carefully planned ambush. At 8:15, the doorbell rang. "David." Emma called from downstairs, her voice carrying false concern. "Someone's at the door." I walked downstairs slowly, calmly, carrying the folder Richard had prepared. Emma stood by the front window, watching as a uniformed process server waited on our doorstep. Her expression was a masterful blend of confusion and worry, An Oscar-worthy performance for someone who'd arranged this entire encounter. I wonder who that could be, she said, but I caught the slight tremor in her voice that betrayed her nervousness. I opened the door and accepted the divorce papers with the same composure I brought to business meetings. The process server, a middle-aged woman who'd probably seen every possible reaction, seemed surprised by my calm demeanor. "Thank you," I said simply, signing the receipt. I was expecting this. As the door closed, Emma dropped her act of surprise. "David, I can explain." "No need," I interrupted, setting her divorce papers on the kitchen counter without opening them. "I have something for you, too." Emma's face went white as I handed her my own divorce papers, the ones Richard had prepared based on weeks of evidence gathering and strategic planning. Her hands shook as she opened the folder and began reading. The first page listed every financial crime she'd committed over the past 8 months. The hidden bank accounts, the stolen money, the fraudulent business expenses, the secret legal consultations funded with our joint assets. Every transaction was documented with dates, amounts, and evidence. "This is impossible," Emma whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "You couldn't have known." "I've known for weeks, Emma. The fake yoga classes, the secret meetings with Margaret Schlesinger, the bank account you opened in your maiden name. I know about the business valuation you commissioned, the character assassination campaign you've been running with our friends, even the handwritten list of fake grievances you've been building to support false accusations of emotional abuse." Emma sank into a kitchen chair, the divorce papers falling from her hands. For the first time in months, she looked genuinely shocked rather than calculated. "You've been watching me," she said, as if I'd done something wrong by discovering her systematic betrayal. "I've been protecting myself from someone who's been systematically stealing from me and planning to destroy my life with false accusations. Someone who's been living a lie for 8 months while pretending to be my wife. David, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You've been preparing to claim that I'm an emotionally abusive, financially controlling husband who doesn't value your contributions to our marriage. You've been manufacturing evidence, creating fake incidents, and building a case designed to maximize your settlement while painting me as the villain." Emma's composure finally cracked completely. "You were never going to see me as an equal partner," she said, her voice rising. "You built this life and expected me to be grateful for whatever role you gave me in it. I deserved better than being your supporting character. So you decided to steal from me instead? To lie to our friends and family? To fabricate evidence of abuse that never happened?" "I took what was rightfully mine," Emma shot back. "That money came from a business I helped build. Those assets represent years of my life, my sacrifices, my support of your career. Your contributions to our business are documented in our corporate records. Emma, administrative work that you transitioned away from years ago. You never brought in a single major client, never developed any intellectual property, never made any strategic decisions that generated revenue, but somehow you convinced yourself that you deserved 50% of everything I created." Emma stood up, and I could see her shifting into attack mode one final time. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You've never valued anything I contributed because it wasn't technical or quantifiable. You think success is only about coding and client management, but businesses need more than that. You're right. Businesses need honesty, trust, and ethical behavior. All things you've been incapable of for the past 8 months. I was protecting myself from a husband who stopped seeing me as a person years ago, who treated me like an employee rather than a partner, who made every important decision without consulting me. The lies came so naturally to her that I wondered if she'd actually convinced herself they were true. But I had recordings of her admitting the real reasons for her behavior, documentation of her systematic deception, evidence that would destroy every false narrative she'd constructed. Emma, we both know that's not true. I have recordings of our conversations where you admit to stealing money and planning this divorce for months. I have evidence of every lie you've told, every dollar you've taken, every false accusation you've prepared." The blood drained from Emma's face as she realized how thoroughly I'd documented her behavior. "You recorded me without my consent? That's illegal wiretapping. It's legal in this state when you're protecting yourself from someone who's committing fraud and planning false accusations. Everything I've done has been reviewed by attorneys who specialize in exactly this kind of situation." Emma grabbed her copy of the divorce papers and flipped through them frantically, seeing for the first time the evidence I'd compiled against her. Bank records, email screenshots, photographs of her handwritten notes, timestamps of her secret meetings. Everything she thought she'd hidden from me. "This won't work," she said, but her voice was hollow. "Margaret says juries sympathize with wives who've been emotionally abused. They don't care about technical financial details. Margaret hasn't seen the voice recordings where you admit to stealing money and planning false accusations. She hasn't seen the evidence of your previous pattern of business fraud with Janet Morrison. She doesn't know that your own sister is willing to testify about the fake text messages you created to manipulate family members. Emma stared at me as if she was seeing me for the first time. "You've been planning this," she said slowly. "I've been protecting myself from someone who's been planning to destroy me. The difference is that everything I've done is legal, ethical, and based on documented evidence of your actual behavior." The silence that followed was the sound of 15 years of marriage finally ending, not with the dramatic confrontation Emma had orchestrated, but with the quiet revelation that she'd been completely outmaneuvered by the man she'd assumed was too trusting to fight back. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "Now you call Margaret Schlesinger and explain that the evidence she's based her strategy on is fabricated. You return the money you've stolen, and you prepare to explain to a judge why you've been committing financial fraud while planning false accusations against your husband." Emma looked at the divorce papers in her hands as if they contained her death sentence. "You've destroyed me," she whispered. "No, Emma, you destroyed yourself." "I just documented it." Margaret Schlesinger's response to my evidence was swift and predictable. Within 48 hours of Emma's panicked phone call, she filed an emergency motion claiming I was engaging in aggressive legal intimidation and financial abuse by protecting my assets from further theft. The court filing that arrived that Wednesday morning was a masterpiece of legal misdirection. Margaret painted me as a controlling husband who had entrapped my wife into admitting financial improprieties through illegal surveillance. She claimed Emma's confession about stealing money was coerced, and that my evidence was obtained through domestic espionage that violated her privacy rights. Richard Chen reviewed Margaret's filing with the calm amusement of someone who'd seen every desperate legal strategy in the book. "She's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks," he explained. "When you have weak facts, you argue procedure. When you have weak procedure, you argue emotion. Margaret has neither facts nor procedure on her side, so she's trying to make this about your alleged character flaws rather than Emma's documented crimes." The emergency hearing was scheduled for Friday afternoon. Margaret wanted to get in front of a judge quickly, before I could present the full scope of evidence against Emma. She was betting that she could convince a judge to focus on my recording of conversations rather than the content of those recordings. She was wrong. Judge Patricia Hendricks had been handling complex divorce cases for 20 years and had seen every manipulation tactic in the divorce attorney playbook. When Margaret began her presentation about my alleged pattern of financial control and emotional abuse, Judge Hendricks cut her off within minutes. "Ms. Schlesinger, I've reviewed the evidence submitted by both parties. Before we discuss Mr. Martinez's documentation methods, I'd like Mrs. Martinez to explain the $40,000 that was transferred from joint accounts to a secret account without her husband's knowledge." Emma, sitting beside Margaret at the plaintiff's table, looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. She'd clearly been told to dress conservatively and look victimized, but her expensive designer outfit and perfect makeup suggested someone with access to significant resources rather than a woman being financially controlled. "Your Honor," Margaret began, "my client was protecting herself from—" I asked Mrs. Martinez to explain. "Not you." Judge Hendricks turned her attention directly to Emma. "Mrs. Martinez, did you or did you not transfer marital assets to accounts your husband was unaware of?" Emma's voice was barely audible. "I moved some money to a separate account, but how much money over what period of time?" "Approximately $40,000 over 8 months." "And did you inform your husband of these transfers?" "No, Your Honor." "Did you have his permission to make these transfers?" Emma glanced desperately at Margaret before answering. "No, Your Honor." Judge Hendricks made notes before continuing. "Ms. Schlesinger, your client has just admitted to systematically transferring significant marital assets without spousal consent or knowledge. How exactly does this support your claims that Mr. Martinez was financially controlling?" Margaret's strategy was collapsing in real time. "Your Honor, Mrs. Martinez was forced to take these defensive measures because her husband had excluded her from financial decision-making, and the financial records submitted by Mr. Martinez show joint accounts, shared credit cards, and equal access to all marital assets. Mrs. Martinez's name is on every major account. Where is your evidence of financial exclusion?" Richard stood up smoothly. "Your Honor, if I may present additional evidence that speaks to Mrs. Martinez's level of financial access and control." "Proceed." Richard approached the bench with a folder I'd prepared that morning. These are credit card statements showing Mrs. Martinez made significant purchases without Mr. Martinez's knowledge or consent. Business expenses charged to company accounts for legal consultations that were hidden from the business partner who would be affected by those consultations. And correspondence showing Mrs. Martinez provided confidential business information to third parties without authorization. As Judge Hendricks reviewed the evidence, Emma grew visibly pale. The legal expenses she'd charged to our business accounts, the unauthorized release of financial information to her divorce attorney, the credit cards she'd opened secretly, all of it painted a picture of someone with extensive financial access who had chosen to abuse that access for personal gain. Ms. Schlesinger, Judge Hendricks said finally, your motion claims Mr. Martinez obtained evidence through improper surveillance. Are you arguing that recording conversations with one's spouse in one's own home constitutes illegal wiretapping? Your Honor, the recordings were obtained without Mrs. Martinez's consent, in a state where one-party consent is sufficient for recording conversations. Mr. Martinez was a participant in every conversation he recorded. Unless you can show evidence that he recorded conversations he wasn't present for, I see no legal violation. Margaret's final gambit was to play the emotional abuse card. Your Honor, the recordings show a pattern of Mr. Martinez interrogating his wife about her activities, questioning her whereabouts, and creating an atmosphere of suspicion and control that forced Mrs. Martinez to seek legal protection. Judge Hendricks looked directly at Emma. Mrs. Martinez, had you been meeting with divorce attorneys for months before these conversations were recorded? Yes, Your Honor. Had you been moving money into secret accounts during that same period? Yes, Your Honor. Had you been lying to your husband about your whereabouts when you attended these legal meetings? Emma's whisper was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. So, Mr. Martinez's questions about your activities were actually attempts to understand behavior that you now admit was deceptive and financially harmful to the marriage. Margaret tried to object, but Judge Hendricks held up a hand for silence. I've heard enough. Miss Schlesinger, your client has admitted to systematic deception, unauthorized asset transfers, and fraudulent use of business accounts to fund legal action against her husband. Your motion for emergency relief is denied. Mr. Martinez's motion to freeze accounts and recover transferred assets is granted pending full discovery. As we left the courthouse, Margaret whispered urgently to Emma about appeal options and alternative strategies, but the damage was done. Emma's credibility was destroyed, her theft was documented, and her narrative of victimization had collapsed under basic judicial scrutiny. The court filing that would follow this hearing became public record, evidence that anyone researching Emma's background would discover. Her carefully constructed image as a wronged wife had been replaced by legal documentation of fraud and manipulation. Emma had gambled everything on her ability to manipulate the legal system the same way she'd manipulated our friends and family. She'd discovered that judges were considerably harder to fool than social acquaintances. The war wasn't over, but the first major battle had been decisive. Emma's strategy was in ruins, her credibility was destroyed, and her access to our assets was completely eliminated. She was about to learn that legal warfare required more than manufactured grievances and false accusations. It required truth, evidence, and credibility, all things she'd sacrificed in pursuit of money that was never rightfully hers. The final settlement agreement arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the emergency hearing. Emma's signature looked smaller than usual, as if she'd tried to minimize her presence even on legal documents. After months of strategic maneuvering and aggressive litigation, the resolution was surprisingly simple. Truth had a way of cutting through complexity. Margaret Schlesinger had spent those 3 weeks attempting increasingly desperate legal strategies. She'd filed motions claiming procedural violations, demanded independent psychological evaluations to support claims of emotional abuse, and even suggested that my business success was somehow evidence of my controlling nature. Each motion was systematically dismantled by Richard Chin and rejected by Judge Hendricks. The turning point came when Emma's own family began withdrawing their support. Rachel testified during depositions about the fake text messages Emma had created and the money she'd borrowed under false pretenses. Emma's parents, after learning about the stolen funds and fabricated evidence, quietly distanced themselves from their daughter's legal strategy. Even more damaging was Janet Morrison's testimony about Emma's previous pattern of business fraud when Judge Hendricks heard detailed accounts of Emma's systematic betrayal of her former business partner, using identical tactics to what she'd attempted with me. Any remaining credibility Emma might have possessed evaporated completely. Forensic accountant's final report was devastating. Emma had stolen $47,000 in direct transfers, charged an additional $23,000 in unauthorized legal and business expenses to company accounts, and attempted to hide assets worth over $180,000 through fraudulent restructuring of our investments. The total financial damage exceeded $250,000 money that represented years of my work and sacrifice, but the document that truly ended Emma's case was the business valuation Richard had commissioned from an independent firm. Unlike the biased report Emma had secretly obtained, this analysis clearly demonstrated that TechFlow Solutions derived its value entirely from intellectual property and client relationships that belonged to me. Personally, Emma might have owned 50% of the corporate entity, but the entity was worthless without the assets she had no legal claim to. Her alleged equal partnership existed only on paper. In reality, she owned 50% of nothing. The settlement agreement reflected these facts with brutal clarity. Emma would retain her 50% ownership of TechFlow Solutions, but the company would be dissolved immediately. All valuable assets, software, client contracts, intellectual property, and business relationships would transfer to a new entity controlled solely by me. Emma's 50% ownership of an empty corporate shell was legally worthless. Emma was required to return all stolen funds, including the $47,000 in direct transfers and the $23,000 in fraudulent business expenses. She would also pay my legal fees, which had exceeded $35,000 due to the complexity of documenting her fraud and defending against her false accusations. Our marital assets would be divided, but only after Emma's theft was accounted for. Since she'd stolen significant money during the marriage, her share of legitimate joint assets was reduced accordingly. Emma would leave the marriage with approximately $125,000, roughly what she'd entered it with 15 years earlier. Adjusted for inflation, I would retain our home, our business, our investment portfolio, and our professional reputation. Emma would retain her car, her personal belongings, and the permanent legal record of her attempted fraud. The most satisfying provision was the one Margaret Schlesinger had fought hardest against. Emma was required to sign a detailed admission of her financial crimes and manipulation tactics. Any future attempt to claim emotional abuse or financial control would be contradicted by her own sworn statement acknowledging the systematic nature of her deception. As I reviewed the settlement agreement that Tuesday morning, I realized that Emma had achieved the opposite of everything she'd planned. Instead of claiming half of my wealth, she'd lost access to the comfortable lifestyle my success had provided. Instead of positioning herself as a victim, she'd created a legal record documenting her as a perpetrator of fraud. Instead of destroying my reputation, she'd established her own reputation as someone willing to steal from her husband and lie under oath. The financial impact on Emma became clear within days of the settlement. She'd been living beyond her means for months, funding her divorce preparation and legal fees with stolen money and credit cards she couldn't afford. When her access to our joint assets was eliminated, she couldn't maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. Emma was forced to move out of our home into a small apartment across town. The luxury car lease was in my name, so she had to find alternative transportation. The country club membership, the expensive clothing allowance, the regular spa treatments, all of it disappeared when she no longer had access to money she'd never actually earned. But the social consequences were perhaps more devastating than the financial ones. Word of Emma's fraud had spread through our social circle with the efficiency of all truly shocking gossip. The woman who'd spent months painting me as an emotionally abusive husband was now known as someone who'd stolen from her spouse while fabricating evidence to support false accusations. Friends who'd initially been sympathetic to Emma's claims of victimization felt betrayed when they learned about her systematic deception. The dinner parties and social events that had formed the foundation of Emma's identity were no longer available to someone with her reputation. Margaret Schlesinger's legal career suffered as well. Word spread through the family law community about her client's spectacular courtroom collapse and the fraudulent evidence that had formed the basis of her aggressive strategy. Other attorneys began questioning Margaret's due diligence and ethical standards when taking on new cases. The business community's reaction was particularly swift. Emma's professional network evaporated as word spread about her unauthorized disclosure of confidential business information and her fraudulent use of company funds. She would need to rebuild her career from scratch, without references from our mutual professional contacts. 3 weeks after signing the settlement agreement, Emma sent me a single text message. I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say to someone who'd spent 8 months systematically betraying me while claiming to love me. Emma's regret wasn't about her actions. It was about the consequences of getting caught. The final settlement agreement sitting on my desk represented more than the end of our marriage. It was proof that strategic thinking, careful documentation, and patient execution could triumph over manipulation, deception, and false accusations. Emma had spent months building a case against me based on lies. I'd spent weeks building a case against her based on truth. Truth, it turned out, was considerably more powerful than fiction, especially in a legal system designed to uncover facts rather than reward creative storytelling. Emma had learned this lesson in the most expensive way possible. Emma's desperate email arrived at 2 in the morning, 6 weeks after the settlement was finalized. The timestamp alone told me everything about her mental state. This wasn't a carefully planned communication, but the product of sleepless desperation and dawning realization of what she'd lost. David, the email began. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to understand that everything I did came from a place of feeling invisible and unappreciated. I never meant to hurt you. I was just trying to protect myself from what felt like a marriage where I didn't matter anymore. The email ran for 6 paragraphs, a masterpiece of selective memory and emotional manipulation. Emma painted herself as a victim of circumstances, claiming that her theft was really self-preservation and her lies were defensive measures against my alleged emotional neglect. She never once acknowledged the systematic nature of her betrayal or the calculated cruelty of her fabricated evidence. I've been thinking about us a lot lately, she continued, and I realized that we both made mistakes. Maybe we could start over, put this behind us and rebuild what we had. I'm willing to forget about the settlement if you are. We could go to counseling, work through our problems, remember why we fell in love in the first place. The audacity was breathtaking. Emma wanted me to forget about the settlement after she'd stolen $250,000 and attempted to destroy my reputation with false accusations. She was offering to forgive me for protecting myself from her fraud as if we were equally culpable for the destruction of our marriage. I know I hurt you, the email concluded, but you hurt me too. You made me feel like I was just an accessory to your success rather than a partner in building it. Maybe if we can both acknowledge our failures, we can find a way back to each other. I still love you, David. I always have. I saved the email as evidence and showed it to Richard Chen the next morning. He read it with the weary expression of someone who'd seen every variation of post-settlement manipulation. This is actually helpful, he said. Emma's email admits to actions that caused you financial harm, while simultaneously trying to minimize the legal consequences. If she ever attempts to challenge the settlement or modify its terms, this communication undermines any claim that she was coerced or that the agreement was unfair. But Emma wasn't done. Over the next 2 weeks, she launched a campaign of increasingly desperate contact attempts, phone calls to my office that I refused to take, text messages ranging from sweet nostalgia to bitter accusations, even an attempt to reach me through our former couple's therapist, claiming she needed closure for her mental health. The most disturbing incident happened on a Thursday evening when I arrived home to find Emma sitting in her car in our driveway. She'd been waiting for over an hour, according to my neighbor, just sitting there watching the house like she still belonged there. When I approached her car, Emma rolled down the window with a smile that was trying too hard to seem normal. Hi, David. I was in the neighborhood and thought maybe we could talk. Just for a few minutes. Emma, you can't be here. The settlement agreement includes non-harassment provisions. I'm not harassing you. I'm just trying to have a conversation with my husband. She caught herself. My ex-husband. About things that matter to both of us. What things? Our future. Your future. You're going to be alone now, David. Really alone. Do you think that's what you want? Do you think you'll be happier without me? The question revealed more about Emma's current state than she probably intended. She wasn't asking about my happiness. She was projecting her own fear about facing life without the financial security and social status that my success had provided. Emma, you need to leave. If you want to communicate with me, you can do it through your attorney. Margaret dropped me as a client, Emma said, and for the first time her voice cracked with genuine emotion. She said my case was unwinnable, and that continuing to represent me would damage her reputation. My own lawyer fired me, David. The admission explained the recent escalation in Emma's direct contact attempts. Without legal representation, she was handling her own desperation and regret without professional guidance. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I meant it. Whatever Emma had done to me, watching someone completely self-destruct was still painful. Are you? Emma's voice turned sharp. Are you really sorry? Or are you proud of yourself for destroying my life so completely? I didn't destroy your life, Emma. I protected myself from someone who was trying to destroy mine by taking everything I had, by making sure I'd lose not just my marriage, but my home, my friends, my reputation, everything I'd built over 15 years. You didn't build those things, Emma. You had access to them because of money you'd stolen and lies you'd told. When the theft and lies were exposed, everything that was based on them collapsed. Emma got out of her car, and for a moment I thought she might become physically aggressive. Instead, she just stood there, looking smaller and more defeated than I'd ever seen her. I made mistakes, she said quietly, but so did you. You stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as an obstacle to your success. You may have won legally, David, but you lost something too. You lost the ability to trust anyone completely ever again. She was wrong about that. Emma's betrayal had taught me to be more careful about trust, but it hadn't destroyed my capacity for healthy relationships. If anything, understanding manipulation tactics made me better equipped to recognize genuine partnership. Emma, you need professional help. Not legal help, psychological help. What you did to me, to our marriage, to yourself, it's not normal behavior. It's a pattern of manipulation and self-destruction that's going to keep hurting you until you address it. Don't psychoanalyze me, Emma snapped. You're not qualified to judge my mental health. I'm qualified to recognize that someone who steals from their spouse while fabricating evidence of abuse needs professional intervention. Emma stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her cycling through different emotional strategies: anger, sadness, manipulation, desperation. Finally, she settled on something that looked almost like resignation. This isn't over, David. Maybe the legal part is finished, but this, she gestured between us, this isn't over. You can't just erase 15 years of marriage with paperwork. No, I agreed, but I can learn from it and make sure I never allow someone to treat me that way again. Emma got back in her car without another word. As she drove away, I realized that the desperate email in my phone wasn't really about reconciliation or forgiveness. It was about Emma's inability to accept that actions have consequences, and that some betrayals can't be undone with apologies and emotional manipulation. She would probably continue trying to contact me periodically, especially when her financial situation became more desperate or when loneliness overwhelmed her pride. But I'd already learned the most important lesson Emma could teach me. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is refusing to let someone back into your life after they've shown you exactly who they really are. The new home keys felt different in my hand, lighter somehow, carrying none of the weight of shared history and accumulated resentment that had made our old house feel like a museum of broken promises. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I'd sold the Colonial in Westchester and bought a modern townhouse downtown, closer to the office I'd established for my restructured business. TechFlow Solutions was officially dissolved, but its successor company was thriving. Without the drag of Emma's fictional contributions and the constant worry about hidden agendas, I'd been able to focus entirely on client relationships and business growth. Revenue was up 40% from the previous year, and I'd hired 3 new developers to handle our expanding client base. The irony wasn't lost on me that Emma's attempt to steal half of my success had actually accelerated that success. Her betrayal had forced me to become more strategic, more protective of my assets, and more careful about who I trusted with important decisions. The business was more profitable and secure than it had ever been when she was involved. Standing in my new living room, surrounded by furniture I'd chosen myself and artwork that reflected my actual tastes rather than Emma's vision of sophisticated decor, I reflected on what I'd learned during the most difficult year of my life. The first lesson was about trust, but not in the way Emma had predicted during our final confrontation. I hadn't lost the ability to trust. I'd gained the ability to trust wisely. Understanding manipulation tactics had made me better at recognizing genuine partnership and authentic relationships. I could distinguish between someone who supported my success and someone who wanted to exploit it. The second lesson was about self-worth. For years, I'd measured my value through Emma's approval and the lifestyle I could provide for us. Her betrayal had forced me to find worth in my own accomplishments, my own character, my own ability to build something meaningful. I no longer needed external validation to know that I was successful, ethical, and deserving of honest relationships. The third lesson was about justice versus revenge. Emma had tried to destroy me systematically, and I could have responded with equal cruelty. Instead, I'd focused on protecting myself and exposing the truth. The consequences Emma faced weren't punishments I'd imposed. They were natural results of her own choices and actions. Justice didn't require me to become vindictive. It only required me to stop enabling her destructive behavior. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, Emma's sister, who'd become an unexpected ally during the divorce proceedings. "Coffee tomorrow?" I have some news about Emma you might want to know. I'd maintained a friendship with Rachel because she'd shown integrity and courage in standing up to her sister's lies. She'd also provided valuable insights into Emma's psychology that had helped me understand I wasn't her first victim, just her most recent one, over coffee the next morning. Rachel revealed that Emma had moved back in with their parents after being evicted from her apartment for unpaid rent. The money she'd stolen from me hadn't lasted long when she'd had to cover her own living expenses without access to my income. She's telling everyone that you financially abused her and that the courts were biased against women, Rachel said. But our parents aren't buying it anymore. They've seen the legal documents and they know what she really did. How is she doing otherwise? Honestly, not well. She can't find work because word has spread about the fraud. She's bitter, angry, and completely convinced that she's the victim in all of this. She hasn't taken responsibility for anything. I wasn't surprised. Emma's entire identity had been built on manipulation and victimization. Taking responsibility for her actions would require acknowledging that she'd systematically betrayed someone who'd loved and trusted her. That level of self-awareness might be beyond her capacity. The thing is, Rachel continued, I think you saved yourself from something much worse. Emma was planning to take everything and disappear. The marriage was already over in her mind. She was just waiting for the right moment to execute her exit strategy. That evening, I sat on my new deck overlooking the city skyline, thinking about the path that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been a successful but naive man who trusted completely and assumed the best of everyone. Today, I was a successful and wise man who trusted strategically and verified everything important. Emma had tried to teach me that love was conditional, that partnership was transactional, and that trust was a weakness to be exploited. Instead, she'd taught me that love should be reciprocal, that partnership requires honesty, and that trust should be earned and maintained rather than given blindly. My business was thriving because I now understood the difference between collaboration and exploitation. My personal life was more authentic because I'd learned to recognize when someone valued me as a person versus when they valued what I could provide for them. My self-respect was intact because I'd discovered that protecting yourself from betrayal isn't cruel. It's necessary. The new home keys in my pocket represented more than just a change of address. They represented independence, autonomy, and the freedom to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. They represented the ability to start over with wisdom earned through experience, rather than innocence that could be exploited. Emma had said during our final confrontation that I'd lost the ability to trust anyone completely ever again. She was wrong. I'd gained the ability to trust appropriately, to recognize red flags before they became disasters, and to protect myself without becoming cynical or closed off to genuine connection. If you've ever felt invisible in your own marriage, if you've ever questioned whether someone loves you or just loves what you provide for them, if you've ever wondered whether you're being manipulated or if you're just being paranoid, trust your instincts. Document what concerns you. Verify what you're told. Protect what you've earned. Most importantly, remember that you deserve relationships built on honesty, respect, and genuine partnership. Don't let anyone convince you that love requires you to accept betrayal, that marriage means surrendering your right to transparency, or that questioning suspicious behavior makes you controlling. The greatest gift Emma ever gave me was the motivation to discover my own strength, wisdom, and worth. She tried to take everything from me and ended up giving me something far more valuable. The knowledge that I could survive anything and rebuild from nothing if necessary. Your story matters. Your strength matters. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to appreciate it. Share your experience, support others who are facing similar challenges, and never let anyone convince you that protecting yourself from betrayal is anything other than an act of self-love and wisdom. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, building something better, and refusing to let someone else's cruelty define your future. The keys to your new beginning are already in your hand. You just have to be brave enough to use them.